Welcome to another episode of the Tower 26B Racer Podcast. I'm Jim Linsky here once again with Coach Terry Rodriguez. Coach, how you doing?
I'm good, buddy.
Rusty,
How are you?
Forgot your name for a second. I was like, who am I on with? Who's this amazing looking guest here?
Well, you have all these coaches here, so I didn't know which one you were talking about.
Too many coaches. Hey, we're live on Facebook right now, too. We said, hey, you know what? We have these pearly whites. Been working on these pearly whites all year. You obviously had yours cleaned, and we got to show off what we have to show off here. So let's go Facebook Live. This is also going to be on the audio version, but we have a lot of listeners that are going to tune in Facebook throughout this one. So we're going to have some fun. And also joining us today, and, you know, I thought this guy has been on our podcast before, Jared, but I guess he hasn't been on. Doctor.
It's shocking.
I know. I'm going to call him Doctor. I know he's not official. Wait, you are officially a doctor. That's right. He's officially a doctor. Dr. Jack Fabian. Doctor. You are a swim doctor is what you are. Some may call it a swim mechanic. I call you a swim surgeon. Swim mechanic is foreshadowing what we're going to talk about later. But you are a swim surgeon, my friend. Dr. Jack Fabian. How you doing, Doc?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Jim.
It is a pleasure to have you on the airways. We have some really, really interesting info that we spoke about yesterday on our Tower 26 team call that I think our listeners are going to get so much out of using a new device that you have been experimenting with. But that's also leading for you, who's been swimming for how long? You've been swimming for? I mean, 40,
I swam for most of my life, but I did take a hiatus when I was very busy with coaching. So I stopped swimming for about 10 years.
Well, you are. Yeah, the thing is, like because of this device, you're making realizations about your stroke, and that's where our listeners are really gonna make some gains and feed off the info that you're about to give them.
Right. I feel like it's, you know, I'm just experimenting on myself because I kind of want to see what it feels like. And you know, I'm at that stage where I took a break for about 10 years, and I'm trying to not be frustrated about trying to get back up to speed. And like many people in our program, you know, I'm looking to improve. I don't compete anymore, but I do compete against my lane mates and
hey, listen, it's easy for coaches to talk. Am I right, Jared? This guy walks the walk, right? But if you want to tell somebody to be able to do something, you got to be willing to do it as well.
Right. And, you know, really now most of my coaching is online. And so I'm interested in ways to kind of enhance that experience for coaching remotely.
This is going to be an exciting podcast. Jared, go ahead. Your head's bobbing off like your bobblehead, Jerry Rodriguez over there. What are you going to say?
Well, I don't know where in the session you had it planned to give a little bio and Jack. So
we're going to get there. Will you just settle down? We are going to. Who's running the show? Me or you?
No, absolutely.
You know what? Actually, that brings me to my first point. That actually my second or third point of the show. You may be running the show because Coach Jim might be headed to the hospital here any second because baby lube is imminent. I mean, we're in contractions. We're getting down to the wire right now. I said, you know what? I got to sneak in this podcast because it's been so long since we've done one. And me and you, Coach Megan, said we are going to get on this. We're going to get on the horse. We're going to grab the bull by the horns, and we're going to make this podcast a regular thing again. And I'm not about to let baby lube coming derail our first podcast back in 2022.
Well, you know, first baby, you know, also on my meeting got derailed by your first child. I was at your house and we were going through some work related stuff, and you went, "Hey, Jared, I got to go, buddy."
So you know what you're saying? You're saying that you are the magic pill to get this baby out.
This might be it.
April 27th, 2022. This kid's coming out because Hot Rod Rodriguez did a podcast with Big Lube over here.
Yeah, well, let's move it along. So we don't want to lose you.
Oh, well, I was at the pool today. You know, we'll go on my schedule. All right, how about that?
Of course.
So I'm at the pool today, and I'm coaching, and everybody's like, "Why are you here? Your wife's having contractions. You should be home with your wife." And I said, "You know what? I have priorities in life. Coaching is my number one priority. Kids, wife, family, they come second, right? So if my baby wants to be born while I'm coaching, he better get his ass to the pool and have a water birth in lane one." Would that be legal for us to go in the Pally? You think Brooke would allow us to bring my wife in the lane one and we have a water birth?
Wait a minute. Before I even answer that, I think I heard he. Do we know that?
It's a boy. Okay. Little Jerry Rodriguez.
Okay. Congratulations before delivery. Yeah.
So if he is born today, I'm coaching Friday. I expect him to be in the pool.
If you want to stay married, I suspect you shouldn't be coaching Friday. So,
All right. Well, you'll be filling in for me. But yeah, we're going to have a really content-rich show here. So I hope these guys are ready to take some notes. And Jack is actually going to show some video examples. So if you're not watching this live, we're going to put this up on YouTube later so you guys can look at his little PowerPoint that he has where he can show his examples of what he learned through this device he was been playing around with and how he changed things up to be more efficient, smooth, faster swimmer from using it. So take some notes, but real quick, we have 3 Ironmans coming up, and we always do who's been listening, right? How many countries and where they are in the ranking. So Ironman Australia is coming up. We have Ironman St. George World Championships coming up, as well as Ironman Mallorca coming up. So we have Australia, the United States, and Spain. How do you think Australia ranks in our ranking system here, Jer? You think we think Australia's
listeners?
How is Australia doing?
I haven't looked for a while, but I would think they got to be in the top 10, if not in the top 5. Yeah.
Fourth place. Yeah. Australia is 4th, but now the Ash Dragon moved over there. Our longtime Tower 26 member, Ash Dragon, she's bringing the Tower 26 mentality over to Australia, and I expect that to shoot up into the top 3. She is pull.
She is something special, isn't she? I mean,
she definitely has some pull over there. We're going to miss her over here, but Tower 26 contingent Australia is going to give Swim Smooth a run for their money over there. And then we have the St. George World Championships, obviously coming up. United States, number 1 by a large margin. And then Ironman Mallorca, the weekend after that, is coming up as well. Spain. So Spain's actually doing pretty well. They're 11th on the list. Is it 11th? Did I say 11th? 11th on the list, Spain. So we have some reach, Jer. No, Spain is 19th. Mexico is 11th because we have Monterrey 70.3 coming up as well. Yeah. So we have some reach here, Jack.
I'm actually surprised Spain is not higher. I mean, that country is really rich with triathletes.
So I'm going to fill you in on something here that I'm going to do real quick in the next couple months. We're going to gain some worldwide reach. We're going to do some outreach programs, if you will, to these countries: Spain, Mexico, Australia, England, New Zealand, Zimbabwe. We're going to get some reach, Jerry. I got some things in the works, so stay tuned.
Yes,
but
sir.
Jack, this being said, with this worldwide reach we have, Jack, I don't want you to be nervous. I see the nervousness on your face for all you that are listening at home on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcast. Jack looks nervous. Jack, are you nervous?
I'm sweating.
You are sweating. I can tell. It's like when I was on Wheel of Fortune, the pit stains are just leaking from under your arms. Let's get into you though, Jack. We're not going to talk about last show. Last show was so long ago. I don't even know what we spoke about last show. Let's talk about Jack. Jerry, how long have you known Dr. Jack Fabian?
Boy, good question. Gosh, Jack, I think when Eva was 14, maybe.
Yeah.
The year that she swam, I believe it was her first year at that Northern California race, the Tiburon Mile. Would that have been her first year?
That was, yeah, you're right.
So how old is Eva now?
So Eva is 28. Yes, 28.
All right, so 14 years ago.
Yeah.
And Jim, that came about from a photo that I saw that ended up being, I think, on the cover of Swimming World that we put on. And it was the start of the Tiburon Mile, which is it starts in this little land bank off of, where is it? Off of what, Jack?
Island, I forget the name of
Little
that
island, yeah. Off of the prison there, right?
San Quentin. Yeah, San Quentin. My uncle's in there, yeah.
Somewhere close to there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all these tall guys, the Stanford athletes, the Cal athletes, local swim team, and it's all these giants, because as you know, today the swimmers are quite tall. So there's sort of 6 foot to 6'7" giants. And there are probably 500 or 600 people, maybe even more on the start line. And so it's narrow start and going back maybe 10 or 12 rows. And then there's this girl, and Eva was not tall at 14. I mean, maybe 5 feet at best.
She was like 90 pounds. And
there's this girl on the front line with these guys, these trees amongst her. And I looked at this girl with this look of insane determination, and she's just standing there ready. And I went, who is this? And I got the rundown, and I said, could you get me in touch with her coach? And that's somehow we got connected.
Oh, yeah.
I think Stephen Atonis made that happen.
And that was very fortunate timing for us, because that was she just had a couple of international races. And when you called, I remember my question to you, I was like, Jerry, why are the Europeans so good at open water swimming and we're so terrible? And you said, you're the first coach that's asked me that, so I'll tell you. And you really kind of a lot of it was mindset and experience and strategy and tactics and things that we hadn't really prepared for. So it really had a different, it put Eva on a different trajectory. I mean, Tiburon Mile was not like one of these races in a circuit. It was just a point to point.
So before we get to Eva and her accomplishments, let's go back to you. Where did you come from? Where did you start in the swimming world, and kind of how did your coaching and performance progress through the years?
My dad was a really good swimmer. He was an immigrant, and then he grew up in New York, and he swam in New York, and he swam in college. But that was back in the days when they would smoke like 5 packs of cigarettes a day and then quit the first day of so it was a different time, but he was quite a good athlete and quite a good swimmer. And so he taught me at a young age, and I swam AAU and country club. But I didn't have the commitment from my parents, because I remember I wanted to join the team in the town over, which practiced at 5 a.m. And my mom brought me to the first practice, and then she said, I'm never doing this again. And so I could only practice when I could go locally. So I couldn't compete for the better clubs, but I swam pretty well, and I had a good feel for the water. When I went to college, I ended up just playing rugby and studying science. So I kind of left the sport. But when I was in graduate school, I got connected I ended up doing triathlons in the 1980s. And I got people to coach me on this bike by agreeing to coach them in swimming, because they were, it was just, people just had no skills at that point. And so
it was the wild west back then.
I think we can fast forward to right now.
I ended up, coaching a group. And then, late, I wasn't going on to science. I did my postdoctoral work, and I still just kind of swam masters. And when I moved to Keene and I was teaching at the college and at a local school, I was coaching an age group program because they were desperate for a coach. And I really didn't want to. I really wanted to drop my kid off and go to the weight room. That was my goal. But that one night they said, we don't have a coach. Can you help us out? So I coached a group, and we ended up getting quite a good group out of that. We had a group of 12 and unders with a bunch of top times in the country from Keene, New Hampshire. And I started coaching as assistant coach at the college. I ended up getting an offer to be the head coach, and it was, better hours than teaching at the college. So I ended up just switching from academics to coaching. And at the same time, I ran a club program. So that through that process, I had some kids make the national junior team. I had Eva make the national team. I became a national team coach. I got to coach at World Championships in China and Pan Pacific Games in Canada. So, and then along with being on the World Cup circuit. So I just was very fortunate for somebody in this area to get a lot of international experience. And just because
what was your PhD in?
Molecular biology. So it's not related. I'm not a swimming doctor.
Yes, you are. You are. So wait till you go into what you're going to go into. You're a swimming doctor.
I had studied that, because.
Well, I mean, Jared, this is what we call. This guy's got chops. He's got swim chops, if you will. Would you agree?
The best thing about Jack is the short answer is yes, but Jack is. You have to pull all of this out of him. He doesn't give much. He's so humble. Doesn't say much about himself. I just learned more about Jack in those last few minutes than I've known. That he's just a quiet guy that just gets the job done. Well.
So talk about your daughter now and what the kind of success she's had, and how she got into this. Obviously, she had a water birth like my son's going to do, and right. From pretty much birth.
Well, we, she was a distance swimmer, but she was also quite a good IMer, and she was a good pool swimmer. And we got into open water, and, I ended up going to one of the USA camps as a coach because she had performed well at nationals. And I remember we went through that camp, and, I had some conversations with Jerry at this time. So we were working on some of these things, and she really excelled at the camp with some of the skills she was developing.
At the open water.
And they had a race at that open water camp, and she was like, they thought the lowest level at that camp, because the kids came in with some pretty fast mile times. There were mostly kids from the NCAAs. They just come back from NCAAs. And that race, it was a 5K, I think it was 10K nationals. They used to run it right after the camp. And I'm on the boat with some of the officials, and they said, "What is Eva doing up there with the top swimmers?" I said, "I think she's trying to win, like
How old was she at the time?
Like 14, and she made the national team. And so after that kind of like put her on this trajectory where, we had some resources. We got to work with national team coaches, national team strength coaches, altitude camps, all these different things, which I learned a lot because I had this opportunity to kind of work these different environments. And then I also traveled through South America, Europe, Asia, going to these open water meets, because at that time, the US wasn't really going to them. And talking to Jerry and Steve Monatones, they said the only way to get good is to race these guys. And we went around and we went to the races, and we were able to get reimbursed sometimes through the national team, but sometimes we just used we had to just pay for this stuff. And I was like usually the only US coach, but she did quite well in that World Cup circuit. And then really it led to she won a world championship up in Canada in the 5K.
What distance? 5K?
Yeah.
Amazing.
She was in contention to win the 10, but she and the top leader that were duking it out got disqualified right before the finish. So, which was...
Were they actually duking it out? Is that why? What happened?
They were duking it out, and there was a strange tiny buoy, which is about the size of a softball, that they wanted them to swim on one side, and they were so wrapped up in battling each other, they went on the wrong side of it. And it wasn't part of the course. It was just something they were supposed to stay away from the rocks, and they went on the wrong side of it, and they DQ'd them.
Oh God.
And they were devastated. And then 2 days later, she had the 5K, and I remember she was, crying after the race. I said, "Well, why don't you just be sad for an hour and then forget about it? Because you have a race coming up." And she pulled it together. To her credit,
that lit the fire, and maybe she would have taken second at the 10K and not won the 5K. So let's just look at it as
exactly. I mean, part of it's like you got to develop this. It's like with your triathletes, the resilience is really important, because you never know what can happen, and you just kind of got to stick in the game.
Exactly.
Hey, Jim, could you imagine spending all your time training on your trainer, never going outdoors, just sit there and do Zwift races all day long, and then go enter a crit bike race? You have no skill set whatsoever. This is what our American swimmers were doing. They spent all day long, every workout, at that point, 10 to 12 workouts a week, training in the pool, no open water experience.
Yeah. And I remember one comment you had to me too, is like, you said, when you're over in Europe, see what those coaches, what type of sports they're watching. And I came back, I was like, they're watching like Formula One racing. And you're like, that's tactics and strategy. That's how they learn. They have an attention span, and that's what you need to sort of give your son. So it was very eye-opening, kind of breaking away from the pool into this open water world.
Well, you have a ton of knowledge and a ton of experience, and we're excited to learn from you in this brief time we have you, but you're obviously going to be a regular on the show. I hope you have no say in the matter. I'm telling you, you're going to be a regular on the show from here on out. If you guys watching on Facebook Live right now, remember, this is live, Facebook Live, so you guys can ask questions. Coach Megan is moderating those questions, and she's going to get those to us. So if anybody has anything real time you want to ask Jack throughout this, or myself or Jerry, we're here to answer those questions. But Jack, let's get into the Triton device that you've been using the last few weeks and kind of go into what you've learned. And like I said, you're going to show some slides here on Facebook Live. But also we're going to talk you through it. So if you guys are just listening, you're not going to miss out. But if you want to see this later, I'm going to put this recording up on YouTube so you can see the slides we're going to talk about. So let's first off present what you've been using, and then let's talk about how that's improved your swimming, and you've come to some realizations as to how our swimmers can better themselves because of it.
Sure. I mean, data analytics is huge in sports now. And I've always been curious about how this is going to work into swimming. They tried to work on this back in 2011. There were some devices that could record a lot of information about swimmers underwater and above the water, a lot of different metrics, but it was very cumbersome, and it had many attachment points around ankles, around your back, near your head, your wrist, and the swimmers hated it. So I don't know if that product is still around, but I was interested because this Tritonwear product is placed on the head. It's approximately square. It's like 2 inches by 2.5 inches. And it's kind of contoured, so it fits under your cap, just snugly in the back of your cap. And then it records about 30 different metrics. About a dozen of them are for your over water, but then, for swimmers, it will record starts, breakout times, underwater kicking times, just a variety of transitions. All these things add up to 30 different metrics. So that's great, but like a big problem with data and analytics is like, how do you apply that to every day? And I had a Zoom meeting with the people at Triathlon, and they showed me some very interesting things, because I think that they're on the right track. What they are doing is, like in business, they talk about, if you have data, they have like data storytelling. And that's for somebody who doesn't really do all the computations and analytics, but they can kind of get the idea of where they can improve their business from this data. And what I see on their app is data storytelling. It'll give you a daily score. A score of 75 means that you're improving. Anything above
This is taking
75.
all the different analytics and putting it together into
Correct. So it takes all your analytics and it kind of throws them into 3 different buckets. There's a readiness bucket, which kind of shows like how.
And Jack,
Yep.
1 second. When you said a score of 75, that's out of what's the maximum score?
So 100 would be a
100.
maximum. So
Okay.
it's sort of like a C plus or something, I guess.
You want to show that slide that you had up there the other day
Sure.
and
Yep.
show those people who are watching this right now live?
I will do that. Yep. So
So you'll see the score that he has there. And like someone like me, I have like a 22. Jack has like, what is, I think you had a 75 or something like that. But
so I will, let me just, so if you're watching this is the device and these are the 30 metrics. They do kind of have like this theme, they call it focused iterative training. To me, that translates to aggregation of marginal gains. That's the way I think of it. It's like the goal is to look at these metrics and then try to make small improvements over time, which adds up to big improvements. So here's that score. So this is a 79. I actually did a swim today and I got like an 85, which I was pretty happy about. I had a very high readiness score, which means that I was recovered and I did a somewhat hard effort. I really just did a long pull, then a set of 5 100s, descend, and then another pull and another set of 5 100s, but descending down to a good rate, working on this with this tempo trainer, as I've been talking about and I'll talk about today. But it gives you 3 buckets. One's called readiness, which is really like your recovery status. And it's based upon, how you kind of perform in that set on those metrics that they're looking at, and your perceived exertion. So you give an RPE score at the end of every swim. And then also based upon your past, how much you've been doing, it kind of will take a look at your training load. The focus score is technical. So it's,
So let me back up for a second,
Correct.
Jack. So that readiness score, you said it looks back on prior score. So there's a little bit of AI built into this then
there is a bit, that's a big part of it.
Okay.
The AI is quite good. It's interesting working with them because, they're learning too, but they were afraid when I first started because I told them I like to swim with a snorkel. They're like, well, we don't know if it's going to work. And I'm like, well, it works for backstroke, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, but, your head's still in backstroke, so it should work. And so they're like, give it a go. And they were happy to see the AI was able to work with my breathing pattern, which was no breathing at all, just breathing with a snorkel. So yeah, that it seemed to learn and understand that, and then it accepted that as my normal swimming, my preferred way to swim. So yes, the readiness score does take advantage of that AI. The focus is, looking at technical. So if your distance per stroke is falling back, if your stroke rate is really low, those things can impact your focus score. But it's also looking at all your other things. Like if let's say your turns are really terrible one day, that could impact your focus score as well, because that's a technique issue. Your intensity can look at like the density of the workout. That's like if you have a lot of work.
So that's the third bucket. So the first thing was readiness. The second
Readiness. Second
criteria
one is focus.
Focus. Okay.
And the third one is intensity. And the intensity is really, how hard you're going that day or how dense the load is. So if you're doing a lot of work, there's little rest. It kind of combines all those scores for this, in this case, it's a 79. So that was a good practice. And basically you look over time and that tells you if you're improving. If you're getting scores like 72, 69, 65, you're going to want to try to dig in and find out why this thing thinks that you're not improving.
And does it spit out sort of a little analog as to tell you perhaps why, or you have to sort of
yes,
dig
it
deep
does.
yourself?
So
Okay.
you could click into one of those buckets. So let's say if you clicked into your readiness bucket, it would say, it looks like you should cut back. You're going into a danger zone. You're overtraining. And I got that this weekend after a pretty hard practice I did on Sunday, where it was a lot of intensity for 7,000 yards. And it was, I thought I was going to get a great score for this set because I had some good times, but it was the readiness score looked at me, and realizing later that day, it was probably right because I felt like I'd pushed it too hard. So it told me some good information, like really take it easy that day. Don't go crazy. So that, like, for example, in this slide, it's saying, if your score is above 75, you're improving. If you get a low score, you could take a look at your readiness. You could take a look at your focus and look at your intensity. One of those scores is probably off. If it's your focus score that's low, that gives you a chance to kind of dig into some things. Like you could either just say, I really wasn't present today and I wasn't swimming well. And you could probably see if that improves the next day. Or if you're into digging into some of, the data itself, you can look very easily and see if your stroke rate slowed down during the sets. Were you experiencing a decrease in stroke count? You can sort of click on each set as you go through and it'll reveal, like let's say if you do 5 100s, you could look at the trend for all 5 100s, or you could look at each individual 100 and see how your stroke rate or your stroke count varied over the course of each 25 in that 100. You can take a look. They have another interesting value, which they call stroke index, which is an efficiency score. I'll talk about that at the end. But if that kind of is fluctuating, that can tell you that your efficiency was kind of going up and down throughout that practice. So I think it's valuable because you can sort of try to find out what do I need to do to improve, and you can track it over time, which is nice. I look at Strava data, and to me, you can find some of this stuff in Strava, but I feel like the data in Strava is more for people that are harvesting your data than for the individual athlete. Because I know sports scientists harvest that Strava data. It's a great resource for researching athletes, but for me, it's not always that easy to kind of put together an individual practice after that.
Yeah, and that's what I like about this next thing you can get into is where can our athletes learn from what you found out from this device? And how our athletes can become better by Jack's experimentation.
That's what, and I was thinking about during the sharpening phase, which is a phase when we've moved out of like some higher volume and real capacity work. So, I always think of, for me with swimming, I think about capacity and utilization. And capacity is sort of building a cup, a giant cup. And that's what you're going to do is when you do the next work is you're going to, the utilization is you're going to fill that cup. If you didn't do much capacity work, you have a tiny cup, maybe a shot glass. But if you have like a lot of capacity work, which we get from our foundation work, you have like a giant beer mug. And now's the time when we're trying to pour that with utilization, and that's going to kind of feed into your performance ultimately at the end. So during the sharpening phase, a good time to sort of I thought to, we use the tempo trainers, and I thought maybe I could use this, system that I'm using, the analytics, to kind of give people a different way to look at using tempo trainers. And I brought up, that I do rowing, most of it's on like an erg. But I was really interested in that, part of what has helped me improve is doing some low stroke rate work on the erg. And what we're trying to do is generate more and more power at a low stroke rate so that when we go into races and we go at a higher stroke rate, we actually will have a more efficient and powerful stroke. And you would think that rowing is a very easy exercise. It's like push with the legs, hinge with the hips, pull the arms. But there's a lot of technique to that, just like swimming, where we have that 1 to 2 seconds of moving 2 arms through the water. There's a lot that goes on in that short time. So my idea was, I would like to think about what I learned with rowing and do that with a tempo trainer. So the first thing I needed to do is I knew, looking at some of my scores and from the Triton, is that my stroke rate was pretty low compared to others that were like me. So I wanted to kind of start working higher tempos. And so as
so there's a data bank there that you can also compare.
Yes,
others.
I mean, there's like a little calendar. You could go back to any of your stuff, but it also tracks over the whole time that I've been using this device. So I can look and you can, what's nice is actually with their AI, you put in your profile as a swimmer, and it will compare you to swimmers. You'll compare you to yourself, and you can also compare to swimmers like me, that are, so if you're a triathlete, you could look at other triathletes that are like you at your level. And you can see, sometimes it'll tell you, your stroke rate is better than 80% of people like you. But originally I was down at like 50%. So I thought I should probably get out of the 50% zone and improve. So what I've learned working with this is, I thought a good way to apply the tempo trainer and this device, or just the tempo trainer alone. And I apologize, my wife is showing up and we're going to get dog background noise. Phase 1 is you start to work these higher tempos. So you're trying to go up effort levels, because it's easier to kind of work higher effort, higher tempo than it is to work distance per stroke, because to work distance per stroke, you need to improve your technique, and that takes time. So phase 1, we work to build higher tempos. So you're working your gears. Phase 2, once you're kind of comfortable with all these different rhythm numbers, you work on technique and distance per stroke. So you maybe back down on the tempo trainer. So if you're working at a 72 tempo, 72 strokes per minute, back it down to a 66 or a 64. And then what you do is you try to work and go different effort levels at a fixed tempo. And so I'll show you.
So a fixed lower tempo.
Fixed lower tempo, which is challenging. It's challenging because what you need to do is you need to sort of, you can't move your arms any faster, but you have to find more water at that tempo. And I presented the first Tower 26 Tuesday where I talked about this. I talked about 2 different sets. A set where I descended 4 200s using 4 different effort levels. So a 70% effort level and an 85, from 70% to 85. And I use different tempo trainer settings, like a 66, a 68, a 70, and a 72. And I showed that I descended those 4 200s from like a 249 to a 232. And the second set I did was I tried to descend 5 100s, just holding one tempo, the tempo of 66. So that's phase 2. And I was able to do that, descend from like a 127 to a 115, holding a relatively low tempo, that I originally would use for a 70% effort. To build on that, this week I did a slightly different version of that set where we had a set where we were doing, hundreds at 85% and a 200 at 70%. And we did several rounds, and each round we did more and more hundreds at that higher effort. And I presented some data where I used the same tempo for both 2 different distances at 2 different effort levels. And in that I mentioned that when I looked at the tempo, there was actually, even though, and Jerry and I talked about this a little bit, even though I was really trying to stay at that 68 tempo, when I was doing the hundreds at the higher speeds, I did somehow go past that tempo trainer setting, because the Triton wear told me, no, you were going like 73 strokes per minute. But nonetheless, it was a good set, and I was able to, descend the way I wanted to. and that the 200s I did at a 70% effort were very fast for me, actually. Usually, going at a 241 pace, I would have to work a little bit harder. So I felt like some of this low stroke rate work was starting to pay off.
So the low stroke rate work is paying off because you're grabbing more water and pulling it behind you as opposed to just spinning your arms.
I think so, that you're kind of learning how to get more watt, because the only way to go faster at a slower stroke rate is to really improve your technique a little bit and to grab a little bit more water.
Well, that's funny because I did it. I was knowing that we spoke about this on the call yesterday. We, I was at the pool today and we had them do it 70%. And at the end, I had them count all their strokes. I want every single person to count their strokes per length. In lane 1 swimmers, they were at 11, 12 strokes per length. And we went down to lane 7 swimmers and they were at 23 to 25 strokes per length. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's that technique and that ability to feel that water, press it and pull it through, which leads to that efficiency and leads to that ability to increase that stroke rate again, with that same distance per stroke.
Correct. And one of the things that's kind of nice about this company is that they get a lot of data, and then they do kind of publish things sort of internally, but they'll show some results. And one of the things they took a lot, something like 6,000 swimmers, data from 6,000 swimmers, and they kind of wanted to look at basically how could you go fast, using this kind of equation of distance per stroke times stroke rate, how did that affect your speed? So what happened when you would increase your distance per stroke versus increase your stroke rate versus increase both? And I presented a little graph. They kind of had this in a 3-dimensional graph. They made a 2-dimensional graph, but it was the graph that I'm showing would, show your distance per stroke on the y-axis.
That's how far you're moving each individual stroke, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And so, it goes from like 0.8 to 1.6 meters. Okay. And then on the x-axis, it would be your stroke rate, going from like a 40 stroke rate to 100 or 110.
If you're moving 1.6 meters per stroke, you're just grabbing a ton of water. You have a huge purchase on the water and you're just throwing it all behind you.
That's a lot of water. Correct.
But if you're going 0.8 of a meter, 8, whatever the heck that means, I don't know. I'm not good at these numerics, but I'm not the molecular biologist. You're not moving. You're just spinning your arms. You're like a hamster on a wheel.
Correct. So you might, in this case, it's not even on the 0.8 at like a 40 is not even on the chart, but there were people that would go 0.8 at like very, very high stroke rates, and they actually could go quite fast. That would be sort of like a sprinter. Like there are smaller sprinters that can move their arms incredibly fast, and that tempo would be very good, might work for them for a 50. Like,
well, you see this in triathlon. You see this in triathlon all the time because these, people want to go swim the way they run. They want to move their arms as fast as they move their legs when they're running. And that you see here, that's not what it's about. It's about how fast you move your arms while you're still getting that purchase on the water.
Exactly. And that's kind of what they talked about. I talked about yesterday was they kind of, what the summary was, we looked at, an example where if your tempo was 60 strokes per minute.
So this is the next chart here that you have up.
Correct. This next chart. And then your distance per stroke was a meter. So it's better than that 0.8, right? But that your pace would be around a 140. But if you increased your stroke rate from 60 to 66 and didn't pull any more water, you would drop to a 127.
You keep it at 1 meter per pull. You drop 13 seconds per 100.
Stroke rate works for sure. Okay. So that higher tempo does drive down that time, and it drives it down significantly. So that's the phase 1 work that we're working on. This would be sort of phase 2 work. Here, you're back to that 60 strokes per minute, but you've increased your distance per pull or stroke by 10%. So 1.1 meters, you're down to a 130 pace. So from a 140 to a 130. So you get a little bit more bang for the buck with the 10% increase in tempo because you're going to a 127. But you're improved. It's 2 ways to get at that drop: by distance per stroke, by tempo. If you increase both, so let's say 5% increase, so you're at a 63 stroke rate, a 1.05 meters per stroke, distance per stroke, you get kind of a medium pace of a 135. So they kind of came up with a formula from that chart, and they said that, for every 5 strokes per minute you increase, you want to try to add like 0.1, 100 centimeters to your, and you're going to get, in that case, with those two combinations, they found that was the fastest way to get faster. Because there are limits to how fast you can move your arms. And like, if you're relying solely on stroke rate, you may not be able to do that in a longer swim. I thought I'd point out one other thing, the stroke index that they talk about. And this is an efficiency measurement. And I don't want to make this too confusing, but it's just basically looking at your speed and your distance per stroke. And then they have a multiplier, which is 2. If it was butterfly, it would be 1. So it's just because you're taking 2 strokes with freestyle. So this is an example for me. And this is what I said, if your stroke index fluctuates a lot in a practice, that your efficiency is kind of all over the place. And that's probably had something to do with the lower focus score. But, for example, for me, I did a swim at 70%, holding like a 120 pace with a tempo trainer at 68. My distance per stroke was 1 meter. My speed was 1.1 meters per second. My stroke index was 2.2. When I did an 80% swim, holding a 115 pace at that same stroke rate, I was able to pull a little bit more water. I was up to 1.1 meters. So that's kind of what we wanted. And that was at the same stroke rate. And my speed was 1.2. So my index is 2.6. So I thought that was pretty awesome until I kind of looked at their charts, and they're like, well, the range is 1.2 to 4.8 and the average is 3.0. So I know I have some, I have a goal to kind of work my way up through doing these 2 phases to see if I can get my stroke index up to 3. It was kind of cool too. They showed Sun Yang, which is, from his data from a 400 free.
And
his
who's
distance, Sun Yang was an Olympic gold medalist, Chinese distance swimmer for the 1500. Kind of checkered history because there were some suspensions for drugs that may still be current, but he has he's an exceptionally long stroke. His distance per stroke is like 1.5 meters per stroke. His speed is almost 2 meters per second, 1.92 meters per second. His index is 6. So I'm at like almost trying to get to 3 and he's at a 6. So it does kind of show you how really amazing these high caliber swimmers are. And having this, you can compare yourself to people the best in the world. And that's why some of the federations are using this. I don't know if they actually use the program from the Tritonware. I think a lot of them harvest the data and use that in separate spreadsheets. But it is kind of cool just for the interested user to look at how you're improving relative to yourself. How do you stack up to somebody like you, and how do you stand, relative to a world-class athlete?
So Jared,
go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna turn it to you, Jared. Looking at all this data, right? Jack is geeking on the data. We have people at home like, wow, this is so much data. Their head's gonna explode. As the triathlon swim coach that you are, Jared, how do you look at this data and you say, how are you going to use this to make your swimmers better triathlon swimmers?
Well, as you know, Jim, triathlon has evolved quite a bit in the last 20 years, and it's become extremely data centric, right? Especially for riding and then running and finally swimming. And I think this is actually a good thing because, Jack, we've been, I think, ancient. We have archaic means of measuring and mapping in swimming, and that there's a long history as to why that is, and we don't need to go into that here, but there's a reason for it. But I'm glad to see that this is progressing. So I think this is good, Jim. Your question was, what would we use? I'd like to go through some of this in greater depth with Jack, but as an example, that score, Jack, that you said, that average 3.06, I think you said was an average.
Correct.
Is that an average of their 6,000 people in their database, or could
it's males? Like that particular one is a male score. So
okay,
I did look at their male. The female score is a little bit lower.
Yeah, because we want to get data specific to triathletes, maybe a certain age, maybe Tell me about that.
It's a pretty wide range. So 1.22. So you can see I'm better than the low end. So I feel like that's kind of probably more your recreational swimmer or your, the triathlete that's kind of working his way to improve up to like the 4.8. Now, say for example, my daughter, she's just in the threes, she's not a very big person, but she's competitive.
She's a world champion. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and it doesn't that, and they do actually point out the index, not everybody, tries to optimize that to the highest number. Most distance swimmers do. Like for distance swimming, it's ideal to get the highest stroke index. For some sprinters, especially smaller sprinters, if they try to maximize that, they sometimes actually lose speed because they need to, they're all turnover type of swimmers.
So Jim, what this does, as we talked about in our least listened to podcast, this will help create more, what's the word?
Presence.
I agree 100%. I have been much more present, because I know this thing's checking out my swims and I'm going to load it up. And, I was thinking about your question as well, but as a coach, this is, especially a remote coach, I wanted to know, you see the times and you might see some scores in Strava for your clients. Or you might just kind of get their input, like, oh, it was a good session. I felt really good on that. And, you can see a progression of effort for their times. But then they ask you a question like, how come I'm struggling with, getting higher stroke rates or something like that. You could just take a look at their file. Like you, as a coach, you would have all your athletes and you'd be able to look at any of their data. So you could say, well, it's interesting. Your scores are kind of low. I mean, maybe, you're going to improve. What's driving your Triton score down each day? Like, how come you're not improving each day? Could be like they're overtraining. It could be that they're not doing a good job with their focus, like your presence. They're not very present during the workout. So the readiness, it could be their focus. It could be the intensity. Maybe they're not working. They're not going hard enough at this. If you're only doing it 2 A's a week, you got to go pretty hard. It's not like you can't really build in a lot of, days that are just recovery because you're only working out twice. You got to get the most out of those 2 sessions. So, I think as a coach, you could, but I do see that swimmers, when we have them report in as part of our remote process, they become more aware of what they're doing on a daily basis. And then this would give them another library to look at. So
yeah, and that's what the whole approach we've taken this year, Jeremy, right? The TNS coaching tech, TNS is what we do. Take no shit coaching. They get to the wall. I say, what was your stroke count? And if they don't tell me what their stroke count was, I make them get out of the water, go run down on the path. Like get out of my water, know your stroke count every 25, because that exactly what you said, it keeps them present. So they might not have the Triton device, but they can tell, hey, I know that I was at 24 strokes per length right there, and I'm used to being at 19. Something was happening. I was losing my mindfulness. I was losing my presence. I was losing my grip on the water. And now it's time for me to get back on it. So like you said, this is just another way to keep these athletes present and focused. Because like Jack said, we only have 2 days, 3 days a week to swim. We're not in the pool, 10 times a week, getting a chance to have one, shitty session because there's 9 other quality sessions. We're only in 2 times a week. We got to make every single stroke count.
And Jack, agreed, Jim. And Jack, the data that you're receiving this is an after the fact, not instantaneous. So that you're not getting that feedback.
You can get live. It's okay. So I think it's not like on your watch because it's just it has no screen. It goes inside your cap. So you're not getting any data, but theoretically Jim on deck could have an iPad with everybody's live feed. He could look at
so the coach that's running a squad session
up to 50 people at one time.
Oh, yeah. Jim, there's your TNS.
Yeah. Here's the thing: most other coaches need an iPad. It's the human computer up top. I can tell all this stuff. How many different metrics are there? Like 27, 30 metrics. All those metrics are in this dome right here. I'm constantly just processing.
I mean,
yeah, that's right.
That is why I talk like this from deck. I do another 100. And I'm doing the robot dance as I'm doing. Oh, Jack, some really good info here.
Great.
I don't even know where to go with all this info. If people want to ask you more about this device, what's the name of the thing again? How do they find more about it? Can they contact you?
Tritonwear.
Tritonwear. Just Google Tritonwear. And what if they want to talk?
Tritonwear.com.
They want to talk to Dr. Jack directly. How can they contact you?
They can contact me through Tower 26.
Jack at Tower 26, or give your personal cell phone number. No, I'm not going to do that. We don't do that on this podcast. Only Jerry gives away his personal cell phone number to everybody. Jack at tower26.com. He'll fill you more in, but he is the surgeon. As you guys can tell, he's the surgeon. We have half the audience is asleep now because they got lost on all the data. Another half is like buying Tritonwear right now.
Well, Jim, let's certainly recommend that folks go, if they're just listening to this, which is how most have been receiving our podcast, go to the live. On
our Tower 26 YouTube channel. This recording will be up there. So go to Tower 26 YouTube channel, subscribe there. And we're going to start doing all of these podcasts on a FaceTime Live, and they'll all be up on YouTube. So we'll have more and more video examples of the stuff that Jack's talking about. So maybe we'll even get a video of Jerry swimming on there. That'll be the podcast, an hour of Jerry swimming.
It's helpful seeing the, seeing the presentation that Jack put together. I mean, if you're able to follow along more carefully. Yeah.
All right, Jack, any final words from you? You're going to stay on. You're going to give some feedback on the rest of the session, but anything else that you wanted to convey to these people, like pick it up and stop swimming like idiots? Like, what do you want to tell these guys? Be real.
No, I just enjoy the process.
Enjoy the process. You better not enjoy it. Put your head down and work. That's what I say. But hey, Jerry, we're going to get to the workout of the episode. First, I want to tell these guys, all these listeners, the Santa Barbara Triathlon. It's happening August 27th, 28th. It's back to a 2-day event. Do you realize it's back to 2 days?
That's what I've been told.
Your third home is in Santa Barbara now. Do you know that we're back to 2 days?
That's what I've heard.
Last year, 1 day. We're back to 2 days this year. And let me tell you something. The Santa Barbara Triathlon, how many races have I done over the course of this career? I mean, what would you say? I think I'm 30 Ironmans, quadruple that half Ironmans, multiply it by ×8 Olympic distance. I've done the most scenic race I've ever done, Santa Barbara Triathlon, by far.
It is a really beautiful, when you start off, and the beautiful thing about Jim is, that swim course. Well, what's the biggest obstacle for most athletes? It's to swim, right?
Open water swim. I got waves. I got all this dynamic environment. Go ahead. I know what you're going to say.
Well, that ocean, or where the swim is in the ocean there, it's as pancaked as it gets.
It may as well be a pool. May as well be a pool. You get a beautiful beach start, beautiful view of the what are those islands called? You got all the islands.
You get the Channel Islands, but there's the harbor there, and then once you get out on that bike course, which does have some hills to it. I mean, it is. How would you say that?
It's definitely it's a challenging course, but you're riding through vineyards, you're riding through the countryside of Santa Barbara. Scenic course, you get on the run, and it's flat, but it's also got some challenging hills to it, but it's along the ocean, and just the most scenic course ever. So August 27th, you have your long course individual, you have your youth racing, you have your relay teams, you have your aqua bike, and then on the Sunday, you have the short course, co-ed division, women only race, parent child, which is pretty cool. So if you race on Saturday, you can go back with your family and race on Sunday. You make a whole weekend of it. So August 27th, 28th, you guys register before May 16th. Before midnight on May 16th, you get 10% off your entry fees. So don't miss it. And guess the biggest selling point of Santa Barbara Triathlon is yours truly is the race announcer. So I will call you guys across the finish line. So SantaBarbaraTriathlon.com. Go there, register before May 16th. Get 10% off your entry fees.
What are we going to do on Sunday, the second day? If you're the announcer, won't you be doing the Daddy and Me?
Well, I think that's the skill. The skill in a good announcer is he can race and announce at the same time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To be honest, and I'm prolonging this live read. We're going to do some live reads here throughout these shows. I'm prolonging it, but the funnest thing I saw last year during this entire race, we have 1,000 people out. The funnest thing I saw was sending off the parent-child race. That was the coolest thing ever because, you have these nervous kids and I'm up there cracking jokes, helping them relax a little bit. And some of them are talking crap to their parents. And it was a dynamic I've never seen before. So that was pretty cool. So August 27th, 28th, we'll see you guys out there. Register before May 16th, get 10% off those entry fees. Jerry, let's get to the workout of the episode. Remember, if you guys want to see the workout of the episode, go to coaching.tower26.com. If you're one of our subscription athletes, maybe Coach Jack is your assigned coach. Remember, all you guys get an assigned coach. You get the audio, you get the video, you get the description in detail of the workout. So Jerry, what is the workout of today's episode?
So this is a pretty basic session as far as when you sort of see what it's laid out. And remember, when you hear this workout, this is for level 1, which are fastest athletes. And then it gets scaled down approximately 15%-ish less for level 2, about 25% less for level 3, and about, Jack, what would you say, 30 to 35% less for level 4. So that's sort of the scaling. So example, as we start off, the warm-up, you can go to the website and get what the warm-up is. But once we got into the main set, which was 10 100s, the scaling would be 10 100s for our faster athletes, then perhaps 8 or 9 100s. Then our level 3 athletes would be about 7 100s. Level 4 athletes would be 6 100s. And the way we set these up, and we gave about a 15 to 20 second rest interval, but we asked them to swim the first 4 at 75% effort. So Jack was talking about that in his presentation. And then we had the tempo trainer set that we've been monitoring and using for the last few weeks, right, Jack? And we had that set at about a 75% reading also. I don't recall exactly what we had it set at what you had assessed from your prior sessions. That what would you set your trainer at, tempo trainer at, what tempo would you want at a 75% effort? So we had them do that for the first 4 100s. And then the remaining number of 100s, so if you're a level 1, you have 6 more. If you're a level 2, you may have only 4 or 5 more and so on. But the remaining number of 100s, we wanted them to increase effort up to 80%. And for some, that may actually mean a slight increase in tempo. For some others, actually tying into what Jack was saying earlier, maybe you would try to maintain your cadence, your tempo at your prior tempo for the first 4, but see if you can swim faster. So that's how we went through that set. That would take probably about close to 15 minutes or so. Short little break after. Then we went into a long continuous swim of that entire distance. So if you were going 8 100s, you then had a continuous 800. If you're a level 4, 6 100s, it would be a 600. And we did that entire effort at 75% output while trying to keep a consistent tempo throughout. We didn't want any variance of the tempo whatsoever, but super consistent in output. Took a couple minutes break, and then we wrapped up. We came back to the 100s again. So level 1 was doing 10 100s, level 2, 8 100s, and so on. So this is a fairly meaty set, as you can tell, because we started off with 10 100s, and it is a 1K. This is level 1, and then 10 100s again at the end. On those 10 100s at the end, we pushed effort. This was the first time we actually moved effort all the way up to sort of, I call this against the ceiling, the upper aerobic output, 85%, and 10 to 15 seconds rest. And what we prefer that we do on these, rather than taking 10 to 15 seconds rest, is to set a fixed interval. And what does that mean? If you can swim 130 speed at 85% effort, then we'd set you at a fixed interval of 140 if we only wanted 10 seconds rest in this example. And what that does, it has you pressing to try and hit that 130 each 100 and not slip over, because it's real easy with non-fixed intervals. If you just took 10 seconds rest to go 130 and then slip to 132, then slip 134, because you don't have to make a set send-off, a set interval. So it's easier to sort of to be less present and fall off a bit in performance. But with a fixed interval, you go, hey, I want to get 10 seconds rest. I got to hit that 130 because every time I'm leaving on the 140 interval in this example. So 3 portions to it. Definite high presence needed, especially with the use of the tempo trainer.
And just using those different effort levels. I mean, that's something that's foreign to so many different athletes, is what's realistically 75%, what's realistically 80%. And did you pace it out correctly to be able to push that 85% to finish up those last 100s? A lot of times, if you don't pace it out correctly, it's just like a marathon. You take out those first 13 miles too fast, you're going to limp over the finish line. If you take this workout too fast, those final 100s are going to be pretty ugly. So it's a practice in patience, it's practice in pacing, and it's really, really great knowledge builder for your future swimming, biking, running, that you need to pace it out, be realistic with those paces in order to be able to finish strong.
I know what's interesting, Jack. I'm sorry.
You can see the difference as a feedback coach in that set from people that I've coached for the past couple of years. they're very careful in the approach of those first hundreds, and then they progress their effort, and they know like what pace they want to hit in that longer swim, because they know how hard those last set of hundreds are very hard. It's hard to kind of improve upon those first hundreds after all that work. And they have done really well. Some of the newer athletes really were frustrated because, you know, they started off too fast, really. And then they kind of hit that ceiling quite early, and they struggled at the end of the longer swim and in those last set of 100s.
Yep.
But again, they know what to work on. So that's a very good set to learn how to sort of manage a healthy load of work.
It's straightforward. There's not bells and whistles. It's hundreds, long swim, hundreds. Pace it out correctly, you have success. You don't pace it out correctly, you poop the bed and you feel sorry for yourself, right, Jay? Okay, so we're gonna have Christoph open that workout. Christoph, open workout 1174. You guys can get in there. You can check it out and see what all the bells and whistles are. Speaking of about the coaching.tower26.com. So go to coaching.tower26.com. Check that one out. Let's get to the question / news of the episode. Jared, we're going to throw some news in here. Remember, guys, if you have any questions, you can do right on Facebook Live. Megan will convey it to me real time, or you can write us contact@tower26.com and we'll get that on the next episode. The first question, and you guys feel free to fight over who's going to answer this one. So it's from Daniel.
Jack, right up front.
What's that?
Let's give it to Jack right up front.
Oh,
and I'll help.
This is from Daniel. Daniel writes, hey, thanks for informational podcast. Jim is hilarious. My question is about the amazing feel I get after vertical kicking. I do 30 seconds of vertical kicking in the deep end. At 6'3", I find it harder in the 4-foot shallow end. I take a 30-second break, and then I repeat that a few times. Once I head back down to the other end of the pool, swimming or kicking with a kickboard, I feel that I'm floating higher in the water, much more streamlined than before. I feel so great. I don't have a strong kick, and I'm working on that. I need to cling to the kickboard close to my chest to keep my head afloat as I vertically kick. But I'm trying to use a smaller portion of the kickboard as I kick down the water each time. My question is, how can I hold the feeling of the perceived amazing posture in the water post vertical kicking when I'm not vertical kicking? I recently added a session each swim where I do 3 by 30 seconds of vertical kicking and then swim 100 yards and go back to another 30 seconds of vertical kicking and repeat that 3 to 4 times. Towards the end of each 100 repeat, I feel my form wanes. I get reinvigorated after each 30-second vertical kick, but it doesn't last much more than 100 yards. How do I fix that posture permanently? Thank you, Daniel.
So it sounds like he's doing the vertical kick correctly, because a lot of people hinge at the hips when they try to do vertical kick if they're not good vertical kickers. Yeah. And that hinging is actually what happens when you're swimming as well. And I know, Jim, you talked about this with, you know, some of the work that you're doing and some of the work that Emily's doing with strength on trying to open up those hips. I mean, to me, it sounds like he could benefit from doing some of that strength training. And I know personally, I like to do Pilates. That kind of gives me a good awareness of opening up hips and going into different positions.
But as he fatigues, those hips start to sink back and
for sure. I mean, you know, with all the filming that I do, that's what you see is it just people bend at the hips when they swim and their legs sink, and it's not easy to kind of keep those hips open. That's what kind of keeps you on top of the water, open it. And you know, I like to do a lot of work with the ankle strap. I know we do a little bit with that without a buoy, but that you can really see when people's hips hinge if they just use an ankle strap and no buoy. They're looking like a letter V going through the water. Where if you work at that, you can, just like the vertical kicking, you can get those feet to float up. So, you know, he's doing the right things, but I would say maybe doing a little bit of strength and mobility work could really help him in the pool.
Well, yeah, and you look at the hip position, that hinged hip position. I mean, look at us, the three of us right now. We're sitting in that hinged hip position. That's the path our body knows, right? So we go swim, we go run, we go bike. Well, biking's a little different, but we go swim and we go run. We stay in that position a lot of times. We have to really counteract that position with, like you're saying, that strength and mobility work, and be really cognizant of keeping those hips forward and curled under us, as opposed to, especially when fatigue, like Daniel's saying here, going back to that, you know, the pathways it knows best, because we're in that seated position 90% of the day. Thoughts, Jer?
Well, when you back up and you go, okay, why do we do vertical kicking? And we do it for the purpose of awareness, right? To try and teach one to be aware of proper body posture. And once you have that stimulus, then what he's really doing is he's taking the stimulus and he's immediately going to swim on applying it. Or it's easier to apply because you just stimulated the proper and correct muscles to use to hold good posture. So one of the things he can also do is even maybe interlace more vertical kicking into a main set, even if it's not in the set. For example, the 10 100s earlier, maybe he would vertical kick for 10 seconds only before the start of each 100. So he would, in essence, get his 15 seconds rest, start off with 10 seconds of vertical kick, then push off. And what it is, it's quick stimulation as to what you need to do, the awareness, hold the legs elevated to the surface, engage the hamstrings, engage the lower back, hip flexors, all those things. So it's stimulation, more frequency, higher frequency of it.
Yeah, it sounds like he's on to the right thing. He just needs a little more mobility, focus, and just like he's doing already. But like Jerry said, just keep reminding yourself what that position is. So we're going to cut it that. We're long enough here. So we'll get to our news next time. Jerry, you've actually been in the news. So next week we'll go over the article I wanted to talk about. But Jack, some really great info. Remember, guys, if you have any questions, contact thetower26.com. All you guys watching on Facebook Live, thank you for tuning in. Jack, any final comments from you? Anything you want to talk about?
No, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, give your dog a little pat on the head for us over here. Jer, final words?
Always thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate all you guys bending in here for the last hour. We're going to come at you. What are we doing every week here, Jerry? I'm making it a statement. We're going to do this every week, and I hope you're used to me hemming and hawing because it's going to be a staple in our Tower 26 educational, if you will, educational material. So thanks for tuning in, guys. For Jack Fabian, Jerry Rodriguez, Coach Megan Milgard, this is Jim Lubinsky, the Tower 26 Be Race Ready podcast.